do you have an important belief you wish to discuss?
Yeah, reincarnation.
Okay, and that sounds great. And by reincarnation, what do we mean by that?
I believe that there's a essence to an individual and an animal that is more than their body. That after their body dies, that essence or soul, if you want, takes on another form or another lifetime and keeps going. Is a part of an evolution towards merging with God.
Okay, so after we die, then um, we, the essence of us, and we can talk about that further, goes on, and we come back as another person.
Yes, once you become a human, I believe that that's the level of consciousness that keeps going until you evolve into oneness with God.
And over time, we'll evolve with oneness with God.
Yeah, and it takes hundreds, maybe thousands of lifetimes.
Okay, interesting. All right, on a scale from 1 to 7, how confident are you that your belief is true?
7.
And on a scale from 1 to 7, how important is it for you to believe in true things? Things that are true and real.
How important is it? 6 or 7. Yeah.
It's pretty important.
Yeah.
How do you know your belief is true?
Well, I have certain experiences that led me to believe that I had known people before or been at places before than this lifetime. And also, just from the reading that I've done, I'm more interested in, I guess you could call it Asian philosophy or, Indian philosophy. And according to many of the teachers from the readings that I've done, it makes more sense to me that there'd be more than one lifetime. I mean, it just doesn't make sense that we just have one shot at life. That just seems ridiculous.
So I think you mentioned 3 things. You mentioned personal experience.
Yeah.
You mentioned that you've had some experiences that showed you this is true. You've read things that have showed you this is true. And to you, it just makes intrinsic sense that this is true.
Yeah.
Of those 3 things, what of those 3 ways of knowing what you know would you say is the primary way you know what you know?
Well, that's a very good question. I think the primary thing would be the experience and then reading about things that reinforce my understanding of those experiences.
Now, did you have a specific experience that led you to this belief? Or is it a series of...
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, what experience, if you don't mind me asking, led you to believe that this is true?
Well, a couple of times, more than a couple of times, I have met people in my life, and I had this strong sense that I've known them before. It was almost like, oh, there she is, or oh, there he is, like unexplained connection. And they turned out to be very important people in my life. I would call it a karmic link, that we had some sort of karma together.
Okay.
That, and then a couple of times I've had actual visions of being somewhere in the past, and it didn't make any sense that it had anything to do with the current day.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you this. Let's say Tammy is sitting next to you, and Tammy hasn't had that experience where she has known people before that she hasn't met before.
Uh-huh.
And let's say, for whatever reason, Tammy doesn't believe the belief, and she hasn't had those visions.
Uh-huh.
And I'm a third party, and I am hearing you and Tammy discuss your belief versus her belief, which seems like the opposite of your belief. How would myself, as a third person, know what's objectively true or real hearing you and Tammy discuss? Is there a way I could find out?
Well, I think it comes down to what is real. what is reality? Is it subjective or objective? And is there a way to measure it? And when it comes to something like this, it's tricky. I mean, I don't think you can measure it. I don't think Tammy, not having had these experiences, would understand, or maybe she could contemplate, perhaps, but I don't think there's a way to say something is real when it's a belief that you can't prove, you can't be scientific about it.
Okay, and you said an interesting thing there. I'd like to clarify. Are you saying that reality, is it a more of a subjective thing, or is a reality more an objective thing in your mind?
I think it's pretty subjective.
Okay. So, if you have a belief that reincarnation exists, and Tammy standing next to you has a belief pretty much the opposite, that reincarnation doesn't exist, then both are equally true.
That's one way of putting it. I mean, again, it kind of comes down to how to define the word truth, how to define what's real. I mean, my experience doesn't negate her experience, or does her experience negate mine? Because they're separate.
Sure. So I guess my question would be that we can both experience things, and do our experience of certain things, does that change whether that thing is true or not in the world, the way we experience it?
Well, we have to interpret our experiences, and that's part of what the brain is trying to do all the time, is to make sense or make meaning of it, of what it experiences.
Sure. And maybe this will help. There's a car over there, and let's say you experience that there's a car there, and for whatever reason, I'm not experiencing that car there.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that reflects whether that car is there or not?
Good question. Well, it's there for me.
So if I don't experience it, then I could say the car doesn't exist
For you.
for me.
Yeah. Well, it's, again, then you're going into the whole phenomenon of perception.
Mm-hmm.
Perception is pretty subjective.
Maybe, and just tell me what you think, the way I have thought about truth, and maybe I'm not thinking about it correctly, so let me know, is that I think about truth in the sense that what that car exists or that car doesn't exist, and whether that car exists or doesn't exist doesn't matter whether what I think about it, whether I perceive it to exist or doesn't exist. It's just either there or it's not there, and what I think about it doesn't have an impact on that. What do you think?
This is getting very tricky and deep. I believe that there are multiple realities, and this whole concept of parallel universes is very probable. I don't fully understand it. My mind is limited, and I believe that there are certain things in the universe that the mind cannot understand, and I think this reality and parallel universes and things like that are beyond my conception. I mean, I can't explain it to you because I am not fully evolved, and my consciousness is limited by this body and this brain and my experience.
Yeah. In a case where we think that we can't fully explain something,
Mm-hmm.
where should we lie? Should our default position be that I'm not going to try to explain that thing? Or should we say, I could go ahead and explain that thing, and that thing that I try to explain is true?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that is a difficult question.
Well, what I'm hearing is that, the mind tries to understand its experience again.
Yeah.
And if you see a car, and you touch a car, and you sit in a car, your mind is probably going to conclude this is a quote-unquote real thing.
Right.
It's within my perception.
But I think what you're saying is that if I don't perceive that car for whatever reason, then that car, for me, does not exist in the world.
Yeah.
And I think what I was asking is, could that car exist or not exist? I guess what I'm asking is that, or the way I'm thinking about it is, if that car exists, it exists for both of us. And if that car doesn't exist, that it doesn't exist for both of us. That we share a world, we share a reality. And I think you're saying that we don't.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there are a lot of things, I mean, that people are totally different in their perceptions of, right? And that doesn't mean, like this whole thing about people being really afraid of what's in books and being taught in schools.
Yeah.
I mean, that doesn't make sense to me. It's like, it's the fear that's affecting people's perception of books. It's not the actual books that are scary, you know?
Yeah, I'm trying to follow you there. No, that's my shortcoming. And I'm just trying to see where you're coming from. And I guess what I'm asking is that I'm thinking about, like, the fact that we share a universe, we share a reality, that if that car exists, that exists for both of us. And I think you're saying that we could share a reality, but that reality we share, that car could exist for one of us and not exist for another.
Well, you know, it's a paradox. I could perceive it and you may not be able to perceive it. Just like, you know, people see things that other people don't see.
How does that reflect whether it exists or not, the car?
Right, good question. Well, it might exist to the person who sees it and not to the person who doesn't see it.
So whether I perceive it or not has an effect of whether it exists or not.
Well, in a way.
Huh.
Or it exists for you. I mean, it exists because I have perceived it and I'm sitting in it and driving it and so on.
If this car could exist for you and not exist for me, and you believe the car exists and I don't believe the car exists, or you believe your belief in reincarnation exists and Tammy believes that reincarnation doesn't exist, wouldn't that mean that all beliefs are true?
All beliefs are true. You know, that I can see how you're going to that, but there's another part of me that says beliefs do not make reality.
Oh, okay. So
beliefs
then,
are a process in our brain.
Okay, you're confusing me. I'm confused. You're not confusing me. I'm confusing myself.
Well, maybe I'm confused and you're just pointing it out.
Yeah, so beliefs don't create reality. So I could believe that there is no car there, but there still could be a car there.
In other words, Tammy could think I'm out of my mind because I believe in reincarnation.
Okay.
But it could still be that she has experienced reincarnation and just doesn't know it yet.
Could she believe the opposite? Could she believe that reincarnation is not a thing and that belief be true?
Well, I see where you're going. This comes down to, again, what is a belief? My belief is, now I'm starting to feel crazy, that whether she knows it or not, she is going to reincarnate as I believe I am, and as I believe my cat is, and you.
And could she have the opposite belief, and that belief possibly be true?
Well, you mean
the reincarnation isn't a thing, doesn't exist, and you might believe it, but she says whether she believes it or not, it's not a thing. That's just what Tammy says.
Right. And so what you're kind of putting me into is a little conundrum here about, because I believe it, and I believe that it's true for me and for her, is her belief true and my belief not true? And I guess that's kind of the problem with beliefs.
Isn't it? I think so.
I think there's some people who have experienced and described reincarnation so well that it made a convincing argument to me.
Yeah.
And the argument on the other side, like people who say, no, you just get one shot at it, that doesn't make sense to me. So I'm using my intuition and my logic and my
Yeah.
experience to form my belief, which you're right, I can't like prove anything.
Let me ask you this then. Regardless of what you believe, whether reincarnation is a thing that exists or whether it's not a thing that exists, what would you prefer being the truth about reincarnation?
Well, I prefer that my essence and the essence of other beings that I'm involved with go on into another form. You know, this is so much deeper than that. It leads right into my belief about karma, and that every action has a reaction, and every behavior has a consequence, and that, for example, in my lifetime, this is probably going to be a bad example, but if I am obsessed with money, say, and am very greedy,
Okay.
and do some naughty things to get money,
Okay.
then my next lifetime might be the opposite, to work out the karma of having created this obsession with money. And I might be either, I don't know how karma works, but I might be really destitute or really wealthy.
I see.
Opposite experiences, you know, like you're making karma, and then you're trying to wear it out on your path to godhood.
Last question. If your belief wasn't true, I'm not saying this is the case, but if it happened not to be true,
Yeah.
would you want to know?
Well, would I want to know? Reincarnation is not true. This is all. It's such a trap. That question, it feels like a trap.
Why?
Well, because I've been believing this for probably since my 20s, and I'm 72, so many years, and it's a part of how I operate and how I see the world. It's part of my lens. So no, I don't think I'd want to know that it wasn't true. And it doesn't really matter, because once I'm dead, and I don't think I really have, consciousness after death.
Well, at the very beginning of the conversation, I asked on a scale from 1 to 7, how important is
Yeah.
believing in something that is true
Yeah.
to you? This belief is true.
Yeah.
I think you said a 6 or a 7.
Yeah.
Do you want to revise it lower?
How important it is?
To believe in true things.
No, because I believe that this is true.
How do you think this conversation went? It's an unusual one, isn't it?
Well, I feel like you probably knew in advance what you were doing, and
This is called street epistemology,
yeah,
and it's just a conversational technique, and it can be used with any belief. You could have a strong belief in reincarnation and talk to someone who has no belief in reincarnation. I mean, anybody can use it, regardless of the belief, and it really gets down to how do you know what you know. That's it. And the belief itself really isn't very important, but I really want to know how you go about forming your beliefs, and that's really what it's all about.
epistemology.
Street epistemology. Yeah.
How'd you get into this?
Great question. It was after the 2016 election, and I was feeling kind of down, and we had two sides of our country having really strong sets of beliefs.
Yeah.
And I was thinking, wow, these strong sets of beliefs are almost opposing, and both can't possibly be true at the same time. And what do we do about this? And that's sort of kind of what set me on this journey.
Well, have you come to any insight or awareness that's changed your perception or your life?
It's a great question. I think the biggest truth I've found is that the more people I talk to, and tell me how this resonates, is that when it comes to beliefs, I get the sense the more people I talk to, is that instead of us holding strong beliefs about things, when we have these really intense, strong beliefs, they seem to hold us. in the sense that if we hold a strong belief and there's no way that we can tell ourselves or find out that that belief is not true, if it happened not to be true, then that belief sort of has us in its grips instead of the other way around.
Well, that's an interesting interpretation.
What do you think?
Well, you're talking about a belief like it's a thing, having it in our grips. I just think the brain is more complicated than that. That part of what the mind does to operate in the world is to try to make sense of things that don't make sense. And making and having beliefs is part of that. And I don't know.
It's hard to talk about. It is. And for whatever reason, beliefs...
I think it's important to have beliefs.
It's very defining for us as humans, it seems, and it's very important. It's very important that we all have them. And
the beliefs that we hold are part of our mental structure for operating in the world and how we're going to respond to things and how we're going to perceive things.
Sure.
So
sure. Sometimes beliefs can almost be an identity.
Yeah. And I don't know.
Well, thank you so much for talking. I mean, I think this short conversation actually encapsulates many of these conversations that I have, that they're really tricky to talk about, and we don't really think about them too much, about how we form them and how we think about the purpose of the beliefs, how they run in our lives, like the software we run in our brains kind of thing.
Yeah.
Until we actually take time to talk about it with another person.
Somebody stops you on the street.
Someone stops you on the street
hey,
and asks you crazy questions.
Podcast on street
epistemology. Yeah, look it up. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. That was really a nice conversation. I really liked it.
Okay. Well, thank you. You did make me think. Well, do you have, when you, in your process of doing all this, has it challenged your beliefs?
Yeah.
Have you become more open or less open? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I'm more forgiving, I think, when I come across intense beliefs. I am more forgiving to others and less forgiving for myself.
Now, what does forgiveness have to do with your
Well,
beliefs?
forgiving in the sense of having many of these conversations, I tell myself that I should be more honest with myself and should be more vigilant whenever I may be happen to be holding an untrue belief, and I should be able to investigate that untrue belief better than others because I'm doing this kind of technique a lot. But the truth is, I think, is that it's just hard. It's just difficult to do.
Yeah. Because then you have to create a whole nother structure or way of operating in the world.
You have to, it's an excellent point. You have to step kind of outside yourself, which by definition can be very difficult. Yeah.